Hey everybody, thanks for tuning back in to the next episode of Genuine Questions. I had to take a brief hiatus because YouTube was not a fan of the opinions that I was giving in the latest two videos that I had posted, so they put me in timeout for a week. And those videos have been taken down. They are about some no topics that you are not allowed to discuss on YouTube, apparently, namely the 2020 suspension and whether or not Schmeided in it. I did make a Rumble account under the same name, Genuine Questions, and those two videos are posted over there. I will post the link to that Rumble channel in the description of this one. So the timing didn't work out exactly perfectly because the episode that I'm making after this current one is actually going to be about censorship. It was always planned to be about censorship. And I thought about skipping over this one to just talk about my YouTube timeout in the context of the censorship points that I would like to make. But I did end that last video with the Chuck Schumer teaser and how we were going to be talking about the Insurrection, Erection. And I definitely don't want to skip over this one either. So I'm just going to keep going in the order that I had always planned. But we can talk more about the YouTube censorship next week. Just want everybody to know that I have had these video topics and the order in which I was going to do them in planned out pretty much since I started the channel back in May. I knew what stories have been important to me over the past 5 years, what I've looked up, what parts of those stories stood out to me, and how they have then shaped my future opinions as new things come up and new developments in the storylines happen. I refer back to things that I felt were important from previous points in the story. We're going to start with the perfect example of that, because if you remember back to when they impeached Donald Trump the first time, and they had the woman who was the impeachment constitutional scholar come on and talk about all the terrible things that Donald Trump's done and why he deserves to be impeached. And the only thing that she talks about is how she's pissed off that he named his kid Barron, because this isn't a monarchy, and you can give your son a title, but it doesn't make him royalty, or whatever the hell that she said. It was stupid. But it doesn't make him a dictator or a wannabe monarch because 15 years ago he named his son like a super rich, douchey sounding name. My beef with what that lady did was that you couldn't find one person, one constitutional scholar that could just sit up there and testify in front of Congress for 40 minutes without going on a rant about how much she hates Donald Trump for things that have nothing to do with the impeachment process or what he's being accused of, but she just personally doesn't like him. And that woman reminded me a lot of the police officers who testified in front of Congress regarding what happened on January 6th, with their stories of being attacked by these terrorist Trump supporters. I did want to show this one clip to start us off because it's one of the police officers who, again, can't just get up there and tell you what happened. He has to tell you how terrible these Trump supporters are and how everybody that likes Donald Trump is obviously some sort of racist, terrible person, and he's got to take the opportunity to just shit on Americans, and now I totally understand why everybody else in the world hates us. And then him and the congressman just engage in like the most douchey laugh, like pat themselves on the back like they're the two most hilarious people in the world for shit-talking Americans during a congressional hearing.
But I noted that you referred to terrorists or terrorism 15 different times to describe the people who were assaulting officers, dragging them through the crowd, stealing their weapons, smashing them over the head, gouging eyes, and so on. However, some of our colleagues have been calling the violent insurrectionists not terrorists, but tourists. Why do you call the attackers terrorists, and what do you think about our colleagues who think we should call them tourists?
Well, if that's what American tourists are like, I can see why foreign countries don't like American tourists. But I can see why someone would take issue with the title of terrorist.
I think it's really big of that officer to acknowledge that some people might take issue with being called a terrorist. But that honestly pales in comparison to what the vice president did on the 1-year anniversary just a couple of weeks ago. The hyperbole that she uses is out of control. She compares January 6th to 9/11 and Pearl Harbor.
Certain dates echo throughout history, including dates that instantly remind all who have lived through them where they were and what they were doing when our democracy came under assault. Dates that occupy not only a place on our calendars, but a place in our collective memory. December 7th, 1941, September 11th, 2001, and January 6th, 2021. What the extremists who roamed these halls targeted was not only the lives of elected leaders. What they sought to degrade and destroy was not only a building, hallowed as it is. What they were assaulting were the institutions, the values, the ideals that generations of Americans have marched, picketed, and shed blood to establish and defend. On January 6th, we all saw what our nation would look like if the forces who seek to dismantle our democracy are successful. We cannot let our future be decided by those bent on silencing our voices, overturning our votes, and peddling lies and misinformation. You see, the strength of democracy is the rule of law. The strength of democracy is the principle that everyone should be treated equally, that elections should be free and fair, that corruption should be given no quarter. The strength of democracy is that it empowers the people. And the fragility of democracy is this, that if we are not vigilant, if we do not defend it, democracy simply will not stand. The violent assault that took place here, the very fact of how close we came to an election overturned, that reflects the fragility of democracy.
The thing about what she is saying there at the end, where she starts talking about the rule of law and needing free and fair elections and how corruption should have no quarter, I don't disagree with the things that she says. It's just laughable to hear it coming from her, the person who kept people in jail in California longer than their prison sentences so she could use them for cheap slave labor. She's going to talk to us and lecture us about how we should be speaking out and weeding out corruption. Maybe we should start with her. And you want to talk about free and fair elections. Well, for an election to appear fair and for people to have confidence in the outcome of it, as we talked about in the last episodes, it shouldn't just be that the people who won are confident in it. There should be a process where even the people who didn't win can audit the process and feel comfortable in the results of this election. So now we'll pivot to the president's remarks on the anniversary of January 6th. And Joe Biden had a lot to say that day. This first clip is Joe Biden using the events of January 6th as a way to fearmonger people and get them to support his voting rights legislation. Because if we just had no voter ID laws and this mass universal mail-in voting that just took place on the nationwide scale, and that was the law of the land from now on, then that would have prevented a January 6th or something, according to him.
Right now, in state after state, new laws are being written, not to protect the vote, but to deny it. Not only to suppress the vote, but to subvert it. Not to strengthen and protect our democracy, but because the former president lost, instead of looking at the election results from 2020 and saying they need new ideas or better ideas to win more votes, the former president and his supporters have decided the only way for them to win is to suppress your vote and subvert our elections. It's undemocratic, and frankly, it's un-American.
And one of the propaganda tactics, I don't even want to attribute this to a specific group of people like Democrats or Republicans or whatever, because I just think bad people do this. People who are in the pursuit of power for their own gain do this, and it's a common tactic, and it's also pretty effective. And it's accusing the other side of what you're doing. So you preemptively accuse your enemies of doing whatever you're doing, so that way you're deflecting suspicion away from yourself. And then once, if evidence does start to come out that you're actually the one doing this, you've already started to lay your cover story that, oh, they're the ones that are doing it. And if evidence comes out that this is happening, it's not me that's doing it, they're the ones that are doing it. And so this is just a quick clip, but I think it, in the light of accusing others of what you do, I think it's great that Joe Biden has the audacity here to accuse other people of shitting their pants.
Finally, the third big lie being told by a former president and his supporters is that the mob who sought to impose their will through violence are the nation's true patriots. Is that what you thought when you looked at the mob ransacking the Capitol, destroying property, literally defecating in the hallways?
So in this last clip of Joe Biden that I will show you here, he goes on to describe the attack on January 6th. And it's just the scariest thing that he's ever been through. It's worse than the Civil War. It's worse than the Iraq War. So between him and the vice president, January 6th has surpassed 9/11, Pearl Harbor, the Civil War, and Operation Iraqi Freedom. And then he goes on to condemn this political violence. This is not the type of country that we want to be, the type that has to resort to violence to get our way, even though he spent the entire summer profiting from the political violence from the Black Lives Matter protest or riots, whatever you prefer to classify those as. We've talked about it before where they sort of own all sides of the argument. And I just had this conversation with somebody the other day where they were telling me that the violence that happened in those protests was justified because after years and decades of trying to peacefully protest for their civil rights, they weren't being heard. And so at some point you do have to resort to violence to get your way. So I asked them, I said, well, that's really weird that you would justify the violence for that reason, because according to the mainstream news and the prevailing Democratic narrative, the political violence that happened at those riots, those were just Trump supporters who were infiltrating the group to try to make Black Lives Matter look bad. that Black Lives Matter was just there trying to peacefully get their message across, and the only times that it got violent at these mostly peaceful protests were just Trump supporters in there instigating it and stirring the pot. So if we do have to acknowledge that it was the Black Lives Matter protesters who got violent, we have our built-in excuse that, oh, after years and years of unjust treatment, they are in the right by turning violent. But then if you can't win with that argument, you can immediately pivot into, no, it was just Trump supporters who were infiltrating the group. I don't see how you can say that that was something bad that was done by infiltrators trying to set them up to make them look bad, and also simultaneously believe that they were justified in committing violence to get their political message across. It's one or the other. People on the left want to have everything both ways. And keep in mind, this political violence that was occurring over summer, Joe Biden was profiting from it. As I showed you, and probably still to this day, I haven't checked today, but as of 2 months ago when I put up the video, if you go to the Black Lives Matter website and you donate money, it kicks you over to the fundraising website for the Democratic Party, actblue.org. So the money that you donated didn't do anything to help the black community. It went to elect Joe Biden. So Joe Biden is fine with political violence as long as he's the one that's making money off of the fundraising that goes along with it. When it's something negative about him and it's people that don't like him that are getting all riled up, now we need to use every power afforded to us from the federal government to shut these people up.
1 year ago today, in this sacred place, democracy was attacked. Simply attacked. The will of the people was under assault. The Constitution, our Constitution, faced the gravest of threats. Outnumbered in the face of a brutal attack, the Capitol Police, the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department, the National Guard, and other brave law enforcement officials saved the rule of law. For the first time in our history, a president had not just lost an election, he tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power as a violent mob breached the Capitol. But they failed. They failed. Well, here is the God's truth about January 6, 2021. Close your eyes. Go back to that day. What do you see? Rioters rampaging, waving for the first time inside this Capitol, Confederate flag that symbolized the cause to destroy America, to rip us apart. Even during the Civil War, that never, ever happened. We all heard the police officers who were there that day testify to what happened. One officer called it, quote, a medieval battle, and that he was more afraid that day than he was fighting the war in Iraq. They've repeatedly asked since that day, how dare anyone diminish, belittle, or deny the hell they were put through? We saw with our own eyes. Rioters menaced these halls, threatening the life of the Speaker of the House, literally erecting gallows to hang the Vice President of the United States of America. This wasn't a group of tourists. This was an armed insurrection. They weren't looking to uphold the will of the people. They were looking to deny the will of the people. They weren't looking to uphold a free and fair election. They were looking to overturn one. My fellow Americans, in life there's truth, and tragically there are lies. Lies conceived and spread for profit and power. We must be absolutely clear about what is true and what is a lie. And here's the truth. The former President of the United States of America has created and spread a web of lies about the 2020 election. He can't accept he lost. He has done what no president in American history, the history of this country has ever done. He refused to accept the results of an election and the will of the American people. And so at this moment, we must decide, what kind of nation are we going to be? Are we going to be a nation that accepts political violence as a norm? Are we going to be a nation where we allow partisan election officials to overturn the legally expressed will of the people? Are we going to be a nation that lives not by the light of the truth, but in the shadow of lies? We cannot allow ourselves to be that kind of nation. The way forward is to recognize the truth and to live by it. The former president's supporters are trying to rewrite history. They want you to see Election Day as the day of insurrection. And the riot that took place here on January 6th as a true expression of the will of the people. Can you think of a more twisted way to look at this country, to look at America? I cannot. Here's the truth. The election of 2020 was the greatest demonstration of democracy in the history of this country.
So Joe Biden just asked everybody how they saw that when they watched it for the first time. And, can you believe that there's people out there that actually think that those people were the patriots? I can see where some people would believe that, because you have to understand how other people feel. You have to put yourself in their shoes and look at things from their perspective. And you don't necessarily have to agree with it, but you're never going to be able to understand where other people are coming from if you don't make that effort to try to see things from their viewpoint. So, yeah, if I think that Joe Biden won the election and, and I've been thinking for the past 4 or 5 years that all these Trump supporters are just a bunch of, racist, terrible people like the news and Hollywood and everybody's been telling me, then I can see why people would buy in to the insurrection, domestic terrorist attack narrative. If you truly think the opposite, that he did not win and that this election was stolen, then yeah, I understand why people would want to go and protest at the Capitol. And honestly, I think that makes more sense than going and burning down a Wendy's or an AutoZone because you're upset about police brutality. Now, you can ask people. I said this at the time during those protests for Black Lives Matter. I said that, hey, this isn't popular, but I would be more on their side if they did go and burn down the local police station or something, the place that they think is responsible for the local community systemic racism, actually take their grievances out on the target as opposed to just looting Targets and fast food restaurants. I don't understand what the AutoZone has to do with police brutality. So I do understand why you would go and try to stop the certification of what you believe is a fraudulent election. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying that I would necessarily do it, but I can, if that's what somebody believes, I can follow their thought process to understand their intent for why they were there. Now, there's a third way that you can look at this that Joe Biden doesn't mention in this speech, which is what I think is going on. I don't see these people as rioters or terrorists. I don't see them as patriots. I'm sure some of them were legitimate Trump supporters that got caught up in the mob mentality, but I think the initial groups of people who orchestrated this and got the ball rolling, I think that they were paid instigators, and I'm going to tell you why I think that. So first I want to put this into some historical context. So if you go back to 1930s Germany and Hitler's rise to power, there was an event that I'm not going to pronounce, but it's Reichstag fire. I'm sure I've butchered that, but I'll spell it up here on the screen so you can Google it if you're interested. But basically what Hitler and the Nazis did was they lit this government building on fire, and then they blamed it on their political opposition, and then used that to use the propaganda and the media to point the finger at them and be like, oh my gosh, they're violent, they're dangerous, they're the bad guys, we need to shut them up and get them out of society. And that's how Hitler is able to take over in the early stages of his political rise. And history does repeat itself, so I don't think we can necessarily rule out that that's not what January 6th was all about, was something orchestrated by the people who claim to be the victims of it. So like in this case, the Democrats, to put it simply, but the interests of the career politicians at large, it was in their best interest to shut Donald Trump up off of social media, where he had 100% control over the narrative. If he doesn't have social media and they ban him from speaking like that, then everything that he says to the public has to go through the filter of the news media before we get to hear it. So you've essentially put a muzzle on this guy on his way out of office. And it would be a genius way to do that if that's what you were doing, because you've convinced roughly half the country that you're 100% justified in what you've done. So that's a really good plan. I can't rule out that that's what happened. And when you look at this QAnon shaman who they make the face of the day, and he's like the only one that you really see like a lot of pictures of, they have all this evidence against him, he's like the poster boy for it. And I want to show you some videos of things that happened inside the Capitol while this supposedly deadly riot was going on. So this first video was shot inside the Senate chamber there in the Capitol, and it shows what I think are possibly like potentially legitimate Trump supporters that have gotten their way in there, that are actually rifling through the senators' notebooks and notes and stuff to see what their arguments are going to be, try to find out if they're actually going to fight for them and stop the election or what they're going to do. So, but they are very intentional about being respectful of everything that's in that building. So they're not really rioting and like causing destruction and damage. They really are just, these people really are just trying to find out the truth in this clip.
Hey, get out of that chair.
No, this is our chair.
I agree with you, brother, but it's not ours. It belongs to the Vice President of the United States when he's in here. It's not our chair. Look, I love you guys, you're brothers, but we can't be disrespectful.
Don't disrespect. They can steal an election when we can't sit in their chair?
No! We're not putting up with that either.
Please, you can't.
It's just, look, it's a PR war, okay? You have to understand it's an IO war. We can't lose the IO war.
We're better than that.
Information operation. We can't do it.
Which brings us to the Q shaman guy who comes in. He is not with this group of people. He's walking around like by himself with his own professional photographer doing like staged photos. And you can tell that this group of other people who are down in the Senate chamber, they're annoyed by him and they're like, you're making us look bad, like shut up, you're so annoying. They're not all part of the same group. This guy's not the leader of this rebellious group of Trump supporters. He's this weird dude walking around by himself that's the only one that just happens to have a professional photographer with him.
There's gotta be something in here we can fucking use against these scumbags.
Quit acting a fool, man!
Americans are having... Oh no, this is good stuff.
Hey! Quit acting a fool!
No, this is good. This is all good. This is something that's talking about butterflies.
And then when you look at these photos right here, this is like the main photo that you find when you Google that day. This is their big poster propaganda photo that they use of this big insurrection, but it's a staged photograph. What kind of insurrection is that where they stop in the hallway to pose for a group of professional photographers? And as you can see, that's exactly what they are. There's 2 camera lenses right there in the bottom of that picture frame. So there's a group of professional media photographers that have been brought in to take posed stage photographs of the insurrectionists. And I'm not supposed to think that this is somehow media propaganda put on by somebody. And when you think who benefits from this media propaganda, oh, it's the Democrats. It's the people that want to get Donald Trump kicked off of social media. There's a Roger Stone documentary where he talks about how he used to donate money to Richard Nixon's political opponents under the name of like the Young Socialists of America. And then when Nixon's opponent would take the money, then he could go out in the news and tell everybody that, hey, this guy's a socialist, and smear him that way. I know at a anti-Trump rally, I believe outside the Trump Hotel, it was actually someone from the Trump campaign who was walking around with a sign that said rape Melania, because they wanted to make it seem that the people in the crowd who didn't like Trump would say something like that. That's shady political business. In Virginia, in this latest governor's race, they hired people to come in dressed as like white supremacists with tiki torches and go to the Republican event and pretend to support him, when really those people were paid to be there by the Democrats. Back in 2016, Hillary famously used to pay people to go to Trump rallies and start fights, and then when they would get kicked out, just tell the media that they were Bernie Sanders supporters. So she was able to smear both sides with just one political trick. So kudos to her for being efficient. So I just find it convenient that about 6 months before the election, you have this guy who's this obnoxious caricature of a QAnon Trump supporter, and he's on the local Arizona news rallies. It's like the face of the Trump supporters.
Yeah! Thank you, President Trump! Thank you, Q! America! Land of the free, home of the brave!
And so is that another instance of what we were just talking about, where you pay somebody to go and pretend to support someone else and have them act like a jackass, so then you can point to him and be like, look at that jackass, he supports Donald Trump. They all must be jackasses. And then he is the one person that's being followed around with the camera crew, and it's just in the perfect time for HBO to be doing their documentary, like hit pieces on the Q movement, where now they have this crazy mascot that they can use for propaganda. And of all of the people that are walking around in the Capitol who happen to get a police escort that day, it just so happens to be that guy. There is a cop walking him around, letting him go up and take a picture in Mike Pence's chair, so he's not insurrecting or rioting or desecrating any property. There's a police officer there letting him do it. And in my opinion, when he walks into that room, the way he greets those Trump supporters is not buddies and friends and, oh, hey, I like you guys. I think he's being sarcastic and mocking them when he walks in. It's like, oh, yeah, some cool Trump supporters. You guys really like saving your country and stuff. Yeah, I respect you. Yeah. That's what he's doing, in my opinion. You can watch for yourself.
Hey! Fucking hey, man. Glad to see you guys. You guys are fucking patriots. Look at this guy. He's got covered in blood. God bless him. You good, sir? Do you need medical attention?
I'm good, thank you.
All right.
I got shot in the face. Where are they? I got shot in the face with some kind of plastic bullet.
Any chance I could get you guys to leave the Senate wing?
We will. I've been making sure they ain't disrespecting the place.
Okay, just want to let you guys know this is like the sacredest place.
I know.
Hey, no, I'm gonna take it. I'm gonna take it. Sit in this chair, because Mike Pence is a fucking traitor.
I'm making sure you guys don't do anything else. Now that you've done that, can I get you guys to walk out of this room, please?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I would greatly appreciate it.
Hey, come on, man.
I feel like you're pushing the line.
Hey, come on, man. I am.
Even if I am wrong and this guy does love Donald Trump, he still did have a police escort, and he wasn't being stopped from doing anything that day. all they did was go down to the Senate chambers and pray. So what is exactly the point of charging this guy and making him this like sole media poster boy as like this violent Q crazy conspiracy theorist insurrectionist? If it was so violent and deadly, don't you have anybody else that you would put up to be the headline cover story for this event? But instead you're going with this crazy guy who was basically walked around with the red carpet that day.
Thank you for filling this chamber with patriots that love you and that love Christ. Thank you, divine, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent Creator God, for blessing each and every one of us here and now. Thank you, divine Creator God, for surrounding and filling us with your divine, omnipresent white light of love and protection, peace and harmony. Thank you for allowing the United States of America to be reborn. Thank you for allowing us to get rid of the communists, the globalists, and the traitors within our government. We love you and we thank you. In Christ's holy name we pray. Amen!
So right now, the media is currently trying to debunk this story that the FBI helped instigate the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And really, their only proof for why the FBI didn't do it is that they asked the guy who is being accused of being the FBI informant, and he said it's not true, and so the media says debunked. Even though it is rather suspicious that this guy's name was on the FBI's most wanted list just days before the insurrection, and then all of a sudden his name was just taken off for no explainable reason. FBI doesn't have an answer for that. But I want to show you this video right here of the police actually moving the barricades to let these Trump supporters come in a single file line, so they're not attacking the police and beating them over the head with fire extinguishers and stuff. The police actually move the barricades and wave them in. And you can watch it happen right here in this video.
U.S. Capitol Police, they're going to have to answer a hell of a lot of questions because this is a video where they had barricades where they literally removed the barricades and allowed these people to come onto the premises. What the hell is the point of barricades, D?
Now, we also have to keep in mind that the FBI has a precedent for staging their own terrorist attacks like this. And we're going to watch this video where Jimmy Dore talks about it. They just recently got caught doing it with the whole plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan. That was blamed on this crazy militant group of Trump supporters, and they were terrorists who were going to kidnap the governor and maybe some governors in some other states too. And when they investigated, it turns out that was just a bunch of FBI informants who planned their own terrorist attack and trained these guys how to do it, and then at the end acted like they solved the terrorist attack that they orchestrated.
What the FBI does is they got nothing else to do, apparently. So they think up these crazy terrorism plots, and then they go to try to find these dupes and try to go, hey, here's a plot. You want to do it? Here's some money. Go do it. We're with you. And then they find the biggest idiot in the world who's maybe literally mentally impaired, and they get them to do these things, and they go, look, we caught some terrorists. 13 men are charged in an alleged plot to kidnap the Michigan governor. You remember that? Remember that story, Graham? You remember that story, right?
I do remember that story quite well.
6 men face federal charges, another 7 charged under Michigan state laws. An examination of the case by BuzzFeed News reveals that informants acting under the direction of the FBI played a far larger role than has been previously reported. Working in secret, they did more than just passively observe and report on the actions of suspects. Instead, they had a hand in nearly every aspect of the alleged plot, starting with its inception. The extent of their involvement raises questions as to whether there would have even been a conspiracy without them. Meaning, if the FBI wasn't around, there wouldn't have been any crime. Nobody would have did this. A longtime government informant from Wisconsin, for example, helped organize a series of meetings around the country where many of the alleged plotters first met one another, and the earliest notions of a plan took root. The Wisconsin informant even paid for some hotel rooms and food as an incentive to get people to come. So the FBI is paying for people's rooms, buying people food. Hey, come to this big terrorist plot meeting. The Iraq war vet, Dan, became so deeply enmeshed in a Michigan militant group that he rose to become its second in command, encouraging members to collaborate with other potential suspects and paying for their transportation to meetings. He prodded the alleged mastermind of the kidnapping plot to advance his plan, then baited the trap that led to the arrests. Last week, the lawyer for one defendant filed a motion that included text from the FBI agent to a key informant, the Iraq War veteran, directing him to draw specific people into the conspiracy, potential evidence of entrapment that he said the government inadvertently disclosed. So they're entrapping people, which is illegal. And they inadvertently leaked that evidence that they were entrapping people. One of the lead prosecutors handling the case was reassigned in May, pending an attorney general audit into whether he had withheld evidence about deals cut with informants during a murder and arson trial in Oakland County in 2000. And on Sunday, in a matter apparently unrelated to the alleged kidnapping conspiracy, one of the lead FBI agents in the case was charged in state court with assault with intent to do great bodily harm. These are the guys who are breaking up the kidnapping plot that they invented themselves. Between 2012 and 2018, the FBI spent an average of $42 million a year on payments to informants, which it officially calls confidential human sources, according to a recent audit of the program by the Justice Department's Inspector General. Many of the defense attorneys have argued that the Watchmen would never have been involved in any kind of plot at all if it weren't for Dan, the FBI informant. It was Dan, the combat veteran, who taught the Watchmen the military tactics, the attorney claimed. After agreeing to work with the FBI, Dan would be given $24,000 and a new car for his services. Dan, of course, has not been charged, nor has the other 3% organizer, Robeson, leading many to suspect that he, too, had been working on the government's behalf. Robeson has denied nothing in his own criminal case, yet he has a gun. But his lawyer argued he'd also had something else, permission as a confidential informant to engage in illegal conduct. Robeson's action, no matter how far outside the lines, were done with authorization from the FBI.
We're all supposed to believe, in the TV shows they put out in the movies that they're just going to put an undercover guy in one of these, crazy organizations and then just get evidence. That's what we're told how it works. And that's what we would assume they would do, right? Oh, we're going to put FBI people undercover and then they're just going to witness these organizations committing crimes and then they collect evidence. And that's what we think they were supposed to be doing. That's what they should be doing if these, and there's some scary groups out there, whatever. But no, they go there and organize something well beyond what these groups ever even thought of doing. They train them. They give them military tactics. I mean, this is insane. This is the FBI. And this happened under Trump. It happened under Obama. It's happening under Biden. We have this rogue, crazy fascist state. And it has very little to do with whether there's a Democrat or Republican in the White House. I mean,
so as you can see, it's not outside the realm of possibility to accuse the FBI of doing something like this. They got away with it a few months ago. I haven't heard that anybody's been held accountable for that. And so why wouldn't they do something like that again? Especially if it is true that all of these career politicians and institutions that have been around for decades and have gotten away with all this crime and corruption, if they would all band together to try to keep out a person who is a not your conventional politician like Donald Trump, or who maybe can't be trusted to keep his mouth shut because he does pop off on social media, Twitter all the time. So maybe he's just not somebody that they can trust to be in the inner circle, and so this is a way to get rid of him. I don't know that's true, but it seems 50-50 likelihood at the very least. So it's weird that the media doesn't at least pursue that line of questioning. That's what makes it even more likely than 50% to me, because the media is clearly corrupt. There's no way that you can ignore all of these stories and not even examine this potential angle that just maybe it's the career politicians who've been in office for 60 years who don't want to give up their power. Maybe they're the problem and not Donald Trump, the reality star of The Apprentice.